Welcome to episode number 9 of the Farms of BC podcast. I'm your host, Jay Cack, and today Navseekon and I will be going deep on the topic of blueberry farms. Whether you're operating, buying, or selling, we got you covered. Stay tuned. All right, Nav. So this is a topic that's very familiar with your family, our families.
Yeah.
We got blueberries and blueberry farms.
Mm-hmm.
We got to discuss the industry. We got to get into buying and selling of the blueberry farms, and kind of just dig deeper into the industry as a whole.
Yeah.
And what better way to do it than digging deep on your experience and kind of going back into history of how you guys started and where you guys are at, and a little bit more about where we expect the blueberry industry to be going.
Okay.
What's your experience in the blueberry industry?
So when my dad first came to Canada, they originally were just living on a farm. They were leasing just bare land. So they moved on to the farm that was just a regular house there. And at that time, there wasn't many blueberry farmers. There was maybe one or two. So our parents saw that there was some success in this new type of berry, which was blueberries at that time. So they decided to go ahead and start planting. This was, I would say, late 70s, early 80s. And they started planting blueberries. They leased the farm. And from that point on, they got one farm, and then it just kept growing and growing. So I was born in 85, and I kind of grew up in that with them. Every summer was in the blueberry farm. Just, you had no choice. You were on the farm every summer, as you know. Right. So the blueberries, it was around us since we were kids. We helped our parents. We picked blueberries. We helped them do all the loading of the trucks as we got older. We helped them with all of the spraying, the fertilizers. We've helped them out with pruning. We've helped them on the harvester when we were kids to like even now. We went to all the packing facilities when we were with kids on the loads just to go drop off the blueberry. So we've seen the whole process from beginning to end, and we still continue to farm till this day, blueberries.
Yeah. I know Dodge is really involved as well,
Yeah.
and he's still boots to the ground. I think he's there right now.
Yeah,
And
he's more involved into that side of things.
Yeah. So I mean, I've gotten advice from him because for myself, I'm just starting to manage my own blueberry farm, and it's only been like maybe 3-4 years that we've actually been managing it ourselves.
When did
prior
you guys...
prior to that, it was actually my uncle and my dad managing it. Now I'm kind of doing a little bit more of that.
Yeah.
Just in recent years, we actually leased it off, right? So I've been completely hands off, just as the real estate career started off, right? So it's just been a couple of years now that we've leased it off.
Yeah.
And prior to that, obviously my uncle was just managing the entire thing, right? So between my uncle and my dad, they managed our current field, which is that 30-acre blueberry farm that we currently own.
Yeah.
Prior to that, we had another one on North Parallel, so that area is really familiar to me, and that was a good 40-acre chunk there, and I think we had another one aside from that. But traditionally, growing up, we actually grew up on a raspberry farm out in the King Road area, right? So
that was always popular back.
Yeah, that was the, I would say, the original berry crop that everybody had.
Yeah.
And even in that area, it was always traditionally just raspberry farms.
Yeah.
Actually, Abbotsford became known as the raspberry capital because of it, right? So that's where we grew up. That's what we did for a long period of time. But we also leased off a lot of farms just to do strawberry crop, right? So that was our big ticket item.
When did you guys convert to blueberries?
So that's the thing with blueberries. It's always been like a side crop for us. It's never been a mainstay.
It wasn't a primary.
So it's never really been the primary. I think at most probably like 50-60 acres at most was probably the peak. I don't know for sure. Definitely my uncle's department for that.
Yeah.
And that was early on, right? So for us though, right now we're doing about 30 acres of blueberry farms. And my uncle also has his own side as well, so they're kind of continuing that. Yeah. But for us, realistically, it was always made as a fresh crop picking.
And then selling fresh.
And selling it direct through our markets.
Yeah.
In fact, it's so dedicated for fresh quality that we actually have 4 varieties that are all dedicated to spread the season as far as possible. Yeah. So early season, mid season, late season. So we have 4 crops that kind of span that period.
4 varieties, yeah.
Yeah. So we always have something going on, and we always have blueberries almost till September, right?
Yeah.
So it helps.
We
with
kind of did
fresh.
the same thing. We wanted to prolong our seasons.
Yeah.
So we've got 3 varieties. The early variety all the way to the latest variety. So we can stretch out our season and kind of average out our return.
Yeah, there's a couple reasons for it. I mean, obviously one is there's better return if you take it to the canneries when there's no other blueberry available, right?
Yeah.
If you're the only one that's providing it, you get a better rate.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something we got to discuss a little bit more in depth. But on the fresh side, it's always better return if you're selling direct to consumer.
Correct.
Right? If you have the ability to do that, that's always the best case scenario.
Yes.
Secondarily would be if you're the only one that has the blueberries and you're selling it direct to the canneries when they need it.
Yeah.
Right? That's the secondary best. Maybe you can speak a little bit further on that.
Yeah, well, the biggest outlets, like you said, it's direct to consumer or wholesale. So what we mostly do is, when we were younger, we always had fruit stands, and I used to go with my cousin. We used to deliver to stores, but as volume grew, as our operation grew, it wasn't sustainable. So then we turned to wholesale, direct to the canneries, to the packing facilities, and we've been with them ever since. And we've always had a home for our berry.
Right.
Yeah. And then, so the other option is direct to consumer. Just kind of like what you said, either you find retail stores that you sell directly to, or you have your own fruit stand.
There's so much nuances when it comes to even the canneries. Like certain canneries only accept certain varieties. And, there's, pros and cons to, where you're going and different ways of operation. And you kind of have to manage all of this environment and pick what's best for your crop, right?
Well, what I've seen recently in the last, I'm going to say 5 years, you're starting to see a lot of smaller farmers do online sales.
Oh yeah. I've seen that recently.
I've seen that, which is good. You got to get innovative,
I started
right?
that off as well in 2020. I was trying to actually really get behind that, just developing my own website and kind of just getting everything on there and try to do that little bit of a fresh direct sale.
Yeah.
Obviously, if I kept going at it, it would have been a good way to go forward.
Yeah.
Didn't stick to it. I wish I did. But that, I think, is a great potential opportunity for a lot of the new coming farmers, or even the existing blueberry farmers. Yeah. I guess varieties side of things. What are the different varieties and what can we...
There's like hundreds. It's but the most popular varieties that we have seen in the last, I'm going to say 15 years, 20 years, has been Duke, Blue Crop, and Elliott. Duke and Blue Crop have been around, man, as long as I can remember, since I was as long as I can remember blueberry farming. So that was 85 when I was born. So since then, I think Duke and Blue Crop has been the most popular. We've seen different varieties come in. Some were successful, some weren't. They had a big hype around them. Draper's been one of them. Liberty was one of them. Rika was one of them. Rika was a high producing blueberry, but nowadays the canneries they rather prefer the other varieties. Elliott, that was a high producing, high return crop, but now we're starting to see most farmers take all those crops out, and they're going with some of the newer crops, the newer varieties. One of the big ones is Calypso.
That's right.
Yeah, Calypso is the one that everyone is kind of banking on, I would say.
Yeah, but it's just untested and you don't have that longevity experience behind it to really say.
I think it's going to take 5 to 10 years to really test a variety. But a lot of people have done smaller scales of testing, like an acre. They've planted it for the last 3-4 years. It's growing well. It's producing well. It's a hard shell. It's a longer shelf life. Good production. Machine pick that you can push into fresh. It ticks all the boxes. We'll just see how it is over a long period of time, right? That's the true test.
Yeah, even to this day, it feels like people are still just experimenting. They don't know if this is the one that they want to go all in on, but they always trust the tried and true ones like Duke and Blue Crop.
Yeah, I think even Blue Crop, I think a lot of people are kind of shying away from. Duke has been the one that stands. Yeah, that stands out. Yeah.
I feel like that's the real standard. Even to this day, I mean, I think my uncle just replanted and they did all Duke, right? So
well, we're thinking about replanting 60 acres. And it's funny because me and my brother were talking hey, should we do some of this Calypso? Do we do Duke? And then we're just like, you know what? Let's just go. Let's just stick with what we know is going to be for sure thing, right? And it seems like Duke's going to be the is going to be the for sure thing for the next 10, 20 years.
And even longevity-wise, we know that these plants last an extremely long time. If they lasted 30 years as it is, that we know of, that's easily, back in the 80s and 90s. But we expect it to go 50 plus.
Yeah.
Right?
We what I've seen typically is blueberry plants will peak off at like year, I'm going to say like 15 to 25 years, and then it flatlines in production. Mm-hmm. And then from there, you'll see it as it gets older and older, you start to see a decline.
Okay.
Just because it's more prone to more diseases, viruses, and things like that.
And what year do you think that comes in? Like
it varies on location, varies on your neighboring farmers.
Right.
Depending on.
See, that's another big issue that we have to discuss as well. Is just neighboring parcels, right? Because there's so much things that are just being transferred.
Well, yeah. So I think the biggest thing with pesticides and spraying and being on top of your food safety audits is you have to do your spraying all at around the same time, or else some of these diseases just move from one farm to the other, right?
Yeah, and sometimes just providing cover and like a little bit of separation.
Just like shrubs or something like that. Yeah,
cedars, whatever it may be. On the side of varieties, that pretty much covers it. I know Calypso's the new
thing. Yeah, I hope it's good because I think a lot of people are looking for an alternative for Elliott. So let's see.
But it covers that same time frame, doesn't it?
It's an overlap, like Blue Crop and Elliott's like in between.
Okay.
Yeah. Gotcha. Oh, but sorry, Blue Crop and Elliott. Yeah.
Yeah. For example, for what we do Duke, Draper, Liberty, and Elliott. So Draper is one of those ones that's a little bit of a niche one.
Yeah. I think it had high hopes, but I don't think it really performed as much as the farmers expected.
We have very little bit. I think it's only maybe 4 or 5 acres, something like that.
Yeah.
I've heard good things about it in niche areas such as wine. It's really good for certain things like this.
Yeah.
Certain varieties are good for baking products and whatnot, and different things.
Yeah.
Liberty's really good because it's a late crop.
Yeah.
But it hasn't come in as popular as the other ones.
Yeah.
Duke's just been a standard because of its size and taste quality. So that's been
it's early.
And it's the first.
Yeah.
First in market, and pretty much if you have a full Duke field, you can pretty much be done within like about a month.
Yeah.
You can just
3 picks, you're done.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one of the advantages why people are still sticking to Duke.
Yeah.
One of the other problems with Calypso that I've seen is that it comes in kind of mid-season. It's between Blue Crop and Elliott kind of thing. It's right in the middle of the season.
Yeah.
There's already a lot of blueberry in the field.
There is, but what I think they're planning is that hopefully that the Elliott will fall off, and then this will kind of replace. This is a replacement of. Yeah,
and I guess one of the reasons Elliott's been falling off is because diseases.
It tears when it rains. It's sour, and the size is not as size is very small. Yeah, it did well because it was a later crop, and then there wasn't much volume or other competitors from different markets around that time. So it was, like you said, it was the only berry in the market. So it was the only thing to sell or buy for most farmers or from most brokers, right?
It filled a gap, and hopefully Calypso will cover that gap, right?
Yeah.
Now, in terms of full production, what does that look like?
Like I've always get this question, what is a full production field? We've seen some people pull out 10 to 15 tons an acre. And that's kind of where I would say I've seen the peak of full production. Depending if you're like Surrey, Delta, those locations, if you're getting 5 ton an acre or 6 or 7, that's considered full production there. But if you're in Abbotsford and like some prime locations where you have good sandy soil, Langley, some of these guys are pulling in about close to 10 ton.
Yeah, no, it's we've seen some of those, and there's some great consultants out there that are doing great work.
Yeah.
And helping people get to those high numbers of production.
I would say if you had to put a number, I think if you're getting anything above 10,000 pounds an acre, I think you're on the average to high end for getting full production.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're low, it's probably like 3, 4, 5.
Well, I would say anywhere from 6,000 to 7,000 pounds is like below average.
So in terms of full production field, like what does it take to really get to that level? Like what do you have
Like
to
a
do?
good farm?
Yeah, is it possible to go from a low production field to go to a high
It
production
is.
field?
It is, but
How
I
does that
think
work?
you can turn a bad field into a really good field, and it just takes time.
Yeah.
It takes more nurture, more care, more fertilizer, more chemical, right? Um, I feel that if you do your plantings really well from the beginning, you'll get to full production faster, and you'll have a longer, better plant. Like making sure you add drainage into your field. Nowadays, most people are doing drip irrigation.
Right.
Make sure your rows are laser leveled. So when you're picking with the harvester, that your harvester is straight, so all the berry is falling directly. The way you shape and prune your plants from day one. Like as you know, the first 2 to 3 years, you're taking off the flower. You're not really picking anything. You just want to be able to shape and grow that plant.
Right.
So it starts from the beginning, making sure you have enough water and not over irrigating, making sure you put all your fertilizers, your chemical, your pesticides, making sure you put bees out. So just the little things from day one and always being consistent will get you to that full production.
Yeah, on the topic of these inputs, I mean, I've seen that people can just increase simply by having more bees out, for example, or having, in some areas, it gets really hot in the summer.
Yeah.
Having double tape, double drip irrigation, having available is great. I mean, you just turn it off sooner if you have to, right? Because of the irrigation, but having that ability in play makes you a little bit more productive as well.
And I think it also comes down to the consultants.
Yeah.
There are a lot of good consultants. Like we've been farming since the early 80s, and you always are learning. So we've had a consultant, and we still have a consultant till this day. We actually have 2 consultants, always trying to get the opinion, trying to average out what's the best scenario, what's the best option, and always just trying to make it better and better.
Just surrounding yourself with professionals and the latest advice, right? Just being on top of it. And like anything, this is it is a science, right? At the end of the day, because you have to progress accordingly to how things are changing. The environment is changing. Things have to be moving forward. And especially when it comes to diseases and these kind of things, there's new things coming all the time. You just got to get ahead of the game. Now, in terms of the buying side of things, I've had a couple clients wanting, and they've been approved from FCC, and they've been approved at the rate of full production field. You know what I mean? Like just hypothetically, they're getting their numbers approved at like 10,000 pounds an acre or whatever the case may be, and now they're ready to go search for that 10,000 pound per acre field, which if it exists, which they do, but those sellers typically aren't selling. And if they are selling, they're selling at a price that is, of the level of that field, which is going to be much higher than they expect. I've found that.
Yes and no. I think, look, if a seller is serious, they're going to have to base it on market value.
Yeah.
So you can have the most amazing farm. That doesn't mean you're going to get double the value. I think especially in today's environment of real estate, yes, there are a lot of good farms out there, but there are a lot of, just like any other business, there's a lot of good farmers that are exiting just not due to the blueberry industry, but due to them just wanting change, or their kids are not wanting to farm. And there's some amazing farms out there. So if there are people that are looking for high producing, good production, like full production farms, you're right. You won't mostly find them on market. But with our contacts, as you know, and the deals we do, it's always done off market.
Yeah.
So, right. So they're there, but you have to hunt and find them. Yeah.
These are the ones that go quick, and usually they go off market, for example, because it's a quick call. It's just like any other industry that's, quota based, for example. They're within their own, communities. They have contacts, right? So it's kind of the same thing. All right, so now digging a little bit deeper. So I know there's machine pick, there's fresh pick, and it is an advantage to have your field set up for machine pick.
Yes.
But what are the differences?
It comes down, so if you hand pick, it's more labor intensive. You do get a better rate from either the wholesaler or even the retailer. that used to be the case. I think we're starting to see that with the machines and technology, and if you prepped your farm correctly, and you pruned correctly, and if you have people on the harvesters cleaning the berry, you can get a really good crop by picking with machine and selling it fresh.
Yeah.
Right? They sell them at the produce stores, the fruit stands, even wholesale. Like they'll pay you if as long as it's well picked. The fresh, it used to be majority of the farms used to pick fresh.
Right.
But with labor costs going up, it's just not feasible anymore.
Yeah, it's expensive.
We're starting to see everybody that's commercially farming gear 100% and leaning into just machine harvest.
That's right.
But you can get a good crop if you know how to machine pick. Yes, it's going to take a little bit longer. Yes, you have to invest a little bit more money, but you get the better return from the packer because you're giving them one grade A product.
And I mean, there's a couple nuances there as well. For example, in our industry where we're doing fresh to market, direct to consumer, the early pick on Duke, we don't want to go in there with machine right away. Sometimes we actually start that off with a fresh pick, just for a little bit until the real crop really starts coming in, so we don't damage the plants. Yeah. And once that little quick pick is done, then we start with the machine pick afterwards.
We used to do that too. Yeah. We used to actually do that for every single variety. Mm-hmm. Go in, hand pick the first little bit. What we've started doing is we've put the beater speeds very low.
Okay,
yeah. Slow down the harvester, and just tap the bush and cut. So instead of having 2 picks, we do 3 picks. And instead of some varieties having 3 picks, we do 4 picks. Mm-hmm. Yes, you have to run. That's what I mean. It's just a little bit more cost. And we do have on the belts, we have labor there just to clean before it gets into the lugs.
That's right.
Yeah. So you can get a fresh pick through the machine, but you have to take those extra measures, or else it's not going to pass grade when you try to sell it.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about the large totes? Now, I know there's some that you can kind of just throw everything into it.
Well, that's based on who your wholesaler is. Yeah. There's some wholesalers that prefer that, but they're not going to pay you fresh rate for it. Right. They know that you're selling it as a processed fruit. They're going to pay you processed rate. Mm-hmm. So for them, it doesn't matter. They'll probably only do 2 harvests instead of 3. Mm-hmm. So they ripen it more. Their costs are low, but they're in and they're out.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things where it's just done like real quick with less labor. You can go a little bit quicker. Yeah. Say, for example, if you have a large field, if you have a lot of fields, for example,
that's right.
You can kind of just get this one quickly done. Yeah. It's just a big tote. You quickly move it.
It depends on how big of a scale you're at.
Yeah, just depends. Now, what are some of the things that you need to consider when you're planting a blueberry farm? Say, for example, a client buys at bare field, and they're just getting started and they want to get into this industry first time. What are some considerations?
Well, I think in today's market, the average budget for planting it ranges anywhere from about $18,000 to $25,000 an acre. So, number one, set up a drainage system. Then I would look into laser leveling the field, depending on how much topsoil there is. You don't want to move it too much. You'd have to make sure your beds are straight and they're laser leveled. That also includes making the beds. That includes the plants. That includes the poles. That includes the wires that you put on. So making sure that once the bush grows, that it sits upright. Yeah, and then it also includes the irrigation system.
And there's also now another fear, which is interest costs, because you're going to be holding that field for a certain amount of time. Yeah. You're not going to be making any income for another certain amount of time because the berry hasn't matured, right? Yeah. So that's the other.
Well, we always when someone is planting a blueberry field, we always tell them to budget 3 years of no income.
Right.
So put that into your budgeting plan before you plant.
And a lot of financial institutions will actually accommodate that as well. Sometimes they're able to give you perhaps interest only or what?
Well, most banks in today's market will accommodate.
Yeah.
They'll give you 2 to 3 years interest only until you start getting some sort of return on your crop.
Mm-hmm. That's where you got to get the agricultural specialists involved, right? Yeah. So that's where.
And I think most banks have now accommodated to that.
Yeah, it didn't used to be that, but now it is. Yeah, now they are much more accommodating for it.
Yeah.
Now, how long does it take to actually plant a field, and what's involved in that?
Ideal planting times is typically in September. Man, if you have everything lined up, you can plant it in less than a couple weeks.
Mm-hmm. And then how fast does production get going?
It's about 2 to 3 years. So about two years that you would take off the flower, prune, and then year 3 you're looking at possibly slowly getting some fruit, and then it increases by like 25 to 30% every year.
Yeah.
Up until it hits its peak mark.
That sounds about right. Yeah. And I've actually seen some plants that come in a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
So they're a little bit closer to that production point.
I always advise just
and
like,
it's like a different cost though. Yeah.
but I would still take the 2 years to get the root growth. Like regardless if you're getting a bigger plant, you still have to go through the process of it establishing itself in the soil.
That's right. And then even then, you can't really machine pick that because it's going to be damaging it, right? So
No,
I mean,
you'd
at
have to-
most,
you
you'd
should-
have to fresh pick it. Yeah.
2 to 3 years you should wait.
Now, on the side of equipment,
Yeah.
what's needed for kind of having an operational blueberry farm? Say we have a new buyer that just purchased a blueberry farm. A lot of the times the equipment will be included, but sometimes it's not. So what are the main things you're going to require to get that going?
I think the bare minimum you do need is you want to get an enclosed tractor, just because when you're doing your pesticide sprays and things like that, you just want to be protected. So a cab tractor, you would need 2 spray tanks, one for overhead spray and then one for weed kill. You would want a rototailler, just so when you're doing your pruning and things like that, you can chop everything up. You would want to probably have a grass cutter, just so making sure you maintain the grass around the property. And your biggest cost is going to be a harvester. So these harvesters, they range from anywhere from 150,000 used to 300,000-400,000 brand new for the biggest and best ones.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And there's different sizes to them as well, right? There's different, depending.
I think if you're a new farmer, do the input cost of your basic equipment. Well, 100 to about 150 for the basic equipment, and then anywhere from 150 to 400,000.
Yeah, if you're just starting out, maybe used is probably better in that case. Yeah. But you can also do the leasing, which is obviously the leasing side of things. Yeah. So totally makes sense. Awesome. Well, that pretty much covers everything. If you got your equipment set up, you got your field set up, you're ready to go. It's a great way to get going, right? So any last final words?
No, just make sure you do your homework before you're buying a blueberry farm. Same thing when you're selling, just make sure it's at its best presentation and make sure you have your production records and
Yeah, exactly. And just expect that completions are usually around that crop completion time. So usually September is where we're seeing a lot of them complete.
September or right before, so they can take advantage of that harvest.
That crop, and usually that's disputed as well. So that's another big consideration. Yeah. Awesome, man. On to the next one.